Welcome to Resilient in Business, a podcast where we dive into insights, strategies, and systems to help you build scalable, thriving businesses. My name is Jad Atwe. I'm an engineer, an entrepreneur, and a business coach. Our intention from this show is to provide value and inspire entrepreneurs to keep pushing forward no matter the challenges. If you enjoy the content, subscribe and help us spread the message. Now, let's get into today's episode. I'm excited for today's episode. Today, I'm here with Douglas Scherer. Douglas is an author, he's a consultant, he's a speaker. He talks a lot about leadership and helping leaders in different capacity build resilience and be able to be strong in high-pressure environments. Thank you for joining me, Douglas.
You bet, Jad. Good to see you.
You as well. How did your career evolve? And to be talking about leadership today, what made you passionate about this topic and helping people in this area?
Yeah. So, in my early career, I was doing a lot of consulting on database issues and I'm looking at data analytics. And as I went from group to group and started trying to bring, a corporation's data analytics together, what I noticed is, and what I experienced is that people were very protective of their silos of data. And what it really said to me is, we don't have data problems here. I mean, you've got to understand your analytics and all that, what all the data means. But what you really have is a problem of organization and leadership, because people are working together as teams and they're scared for their jobs. So they're hoarding their data. So you can't even get the analytics to help the corporation that you want. And by the way, I'm not the only one that's experienced that. I've talked to other people that were doing data work at that time, and they experienced exactly the same thing, because that was seen as a power. As holding powers, holding that data. So you couldn't do like cross, department analytics, which you absolutely need. So I started getting more into like knowledge management, and then through knowledge management, really started to understand more and more what I was experiencing, but through theory. And I got my doctorate in org leadership and learning from Columbia as part of that, because they were very much into the knowledge management piece. But knowledge management from the idea of systems thinking, like how are we sharing knowledge? Definitely not, document management systems. That's a totally different thing. But from the idea of like, how do we use and maintain and share knowledge, especially knowledge that's what they call tacit, which is stuff that's inside people's minds. Because you can't, as you know, I'm sure you've experienced, you can't get everything out onto paper. No matter how much you try, there's no way you can get everything that someone knows out onto paper. I mean, maybe once we start hitting the singularity and people are like downloading their minds into the AI cloud or whatever, I mean, maybe we'll get there. But it's actually funny because they're starting to move more towards that, where they're creating avatars for you for people in corporations that can then start acting as you in certain scenarios. That's kind of the future now. But what I found is, as I got more into that, it's really a leadership problem and an organization problem. So I got very, very much more into the idea and researching and following up on and talking to leaders about different ways of leadership and how to make organizations work.
Yes. And this eventually led you to write the book, Forged?
Yeah. There's one behind me, that back there. Here's one right here.
Amazing.
And what I did is, and I wrote that in 2021. My doctoral research actually is on executive mentoring. So how do people learn and give to the next generation? This book is kind of a follow-up from that, which is talking to individual leaders about the ways that they lead and make decisions in very high-stakes situation where they don't have enough information. So that's almost every situation you're going to deal with in a strategic problem.
Yes.
And so I talked to someone who helped bring Wi-Fi, basically was instrumental in bringing Wi-Fi to airplanes, to passenger airplanes, all the way to the people who are running the local food pantry. And in all these situations where they either had to step up or come to moments where they just had never experienced them before. And that's what leadership is really about. Right? It's not, if you're just getting people to do their work, you're a manager, right? That's not leadership. If you're thinking of new ways to approach problems and you're dealing with problems that no one's ever seen before and thinking of them, making decisions of what to do next and moving them forward through your actions, you're a leader at that point.
So between all of the people that you've interviewed, did you find any commonalities? What are the common traits that leaders should have in order to make good decisions under pressure?
Absolutely. And I call them in the book, I call them the 6 practices. So Forged, each letter of Forged stands for one of the 6 practices. But overall, what it really comes to is I would boil it down to this, like being present in the moment and allowing the ideas, all the competing ideas to come into into your psyche, and finding a way, and there's lots of ways that we could, there's different ways that we could talk about. One of the ways I work with is mindfulness and embodiment, and there's some yoga stuff and breathing, but finding a way to be present with all the conflicting viewpoints and really knowing who you are and bringing yourself to this decision process so that you can make that decision in a way that it represents you. Because the key piece to it is this, is once you make that decision, you take action in the real world, you've now expressed yourself in the world. I mean, you've now become somebody, and you may have transformed, and that's one of the keys to this stuff, is that through this process of dealing with new situations you never seen before, you actually do some sort of personal transformation. But when you take that action, it represents you in the real world and how you're affecting the world. And so what that means is you really have to be present as yourself as you're making these decisions in order to make them properly. Bring your values, bring your expertise, bring your skill sets and your knowledge, all of it come together.
What do you consider a high stakes environment? Like what sort of environment are we talking about here?
Well, it's all situational, but for some of the folks, it was dealing with the pandemic. So in that case, you have life and death decisions. I mean, literally life and death decisions. One of the folks I talked to had just been hired to lead this department, and it's in chapter 9. There's a lot of great stories in chapter 9 because there's a lot of individual folks versus like large problems. And she was hired the week before the pandemic, and she never saw her staff for almost a year. But what she noticed is when she started working with folks, there was a lot of, I want to say, like emotion. They were worried. There was a lot of worry. There was, a lot of concern. What's going to happen next? And so she actually took this tact of, she met with them, even though, she went like one level below her directs. So she talked to her directs, but she also talked to the directs, right? So 2 levels down. And she met with all the folks that was underneath her, and met with them one-on-one and talked to them, what are your wishes? What are your concerns? All those things, because she knew she had to deal with it at an emotional level. Really, there was one story of a woman who was running this effort, and the individual who was directing the offshore part of it took his own life. And it was right before a big delivery. And so she was, I think in London at the time, if I remember correctly. How does she deal with this team? How does she get them to step up while they're under this whole emotional problem themselves and get this thing finished on time? And she took a very similar tact, which is deal with their emotions, deal with them as people, and get them to come together as a team so they could deliver it on. And they all stepped up. They all stepped up and got this thing done. So you find that over and over again, is that you can't take the people portion out of it. The more you're just focused on, I mean, they're all businesses, so you have to have KPIs and ROIs and numbers. There's no question, otherwise you don't have a business. But if you're only dealing with folks based on some numeric problem, if that's the only piece you're bringing to it, then you're really not going to be able to lead that team as an innovative team, as a creative team, as a productive team. You might for a couple of days be able to smash it out of them, right? Which sometimes you have to do, but that's not a long-term resolution to creating a real organization that works together.
Hey, a quick commercial break. This podcast is brought to you by Business Optimization Partners, a firm that specializes in helping entrepreneurs systemize their business and transform it into a professionally managed asset that is scalable and easy to operate. If you wish to learn more, download the guide to running a professionally managed business that's available in the description. Now, back to the episode. This is where true leadership comes in, and having this experience and drawing on personal experience, and as you're saying, mindfulness, being level-headed, I guess, in order to step back, take a deep breath, and understand what to do. What other aspects do you believe should be present?
So the mindfulness pieces, I really think of it as just, I mean, that's a word that some people like and dislike, but it's really about being present. So, and aware of what's really going on. You can almost think of it as like situational awareness, right? If you're focused on the things that you did last time, you're not really being present with what's really going on right now. So, I mean, but some of the other ways that you can do that is through breathing exercises, feeling. A lot of times what I do is, and in my keynote talks, I have people just like feel their feet on the floor. Because when you connect with that, you're actually connecting your body to physical presence, and you're bringing, instead of just letting your mind go crazy, and they call it the monkey mind, letting it run wild, you now are coming down into this moment. So when you put all that stuff together, it actually brings you into the room. Some of it's just like just really being aware of what's happening. So you can think of it as like mindful working, but there's a thing like mindful eating is really just like taking a bite and just feeling like, what's the texture of the thing? What does it feel like? Is it taste similar now, or 3 minutes ago, 3 bites ago, as it does right now? So it's really about seeing like what's really happening right now. And again, you can do it through breathing, through like embodiment, like just feeling your feet on the floor, hearing your dog bark and just being aware of it. I'll just give an example of, I've had one time I was talking to, for instance, technology group, about 400 people in the room. And I was talking to them about making sure and how to keep engagement and the importance of making your teams engaged. And while I drove their energy levels up, I kind of like to build it up. And then I had them just feel their feet on the floor, and the whole room, the whole energy changed. And if you can bring that energy to these moments where you're feeling pressures, from all the stakeholders, the shareholders, the board, whoever's above you or underneath you, the people who are waiting for you to make this decision, and the worries about like, oh my God, if you're worried about like, oh my God, if I make this decision, it's the wrong one, how's it going to affect the market? I mean, clearly you want it to be right. But if the worry is the key thing that's driving you, you're not really thinking about what's really the innovative thing, what's really the creative thing. So pulling yourself down, like being in the moment, allows you to just be present with like every data point that's going on. It's really the way, to me, to use data. I mean, some of the biggest counterpoints I get is, well, what about data? You've got to use data. Yeah, I'm not saying don't use data, right? What I'm saying is, in a lot of situations where you have never seen the solution before, you've never seen the situation before, all the data in the world is not going to get you to the final answer. You still, as a leader, have to make that bridge and climb that cliff that's never been climbed before. And so if you're frazzled, you're less likely to come to a decision that represents you, your expertise, and your values.
Let's talk more about the Forge framework. What are the other aspects of it?
Well, there's one of the ones I really like to talk about is drive community bonds, which is actually the one I just talked about, and then employ what I call action communications. So this is the idea that your actions speak louder than words. It doesn't matter like how good your messaging is, right? People will smell, something that stinks, right away. If you're not really showing through your actions what you want people to do and how you want people to act, they're not going to act that way. Right. So I'll give you an example. They're not the fires this time, but I use an example of the campfires, which were maybe 3 years ago in Northern California. And what they found is that when the fire captains exhibited or adhered to the safety rules themselves, even they would tell everybody, be safe. And I'm sure, they have a lot of guidelines. But when the captains and the commanders did it themselves, the firemen and fire folks, I guess, both genders, they were much more likely to follow the fire, the guidelines, the safety guidelines. It's the same way when you're leading an organization, right? Your actions really are the message. The actions are the message. So I use a poem in the book from early Spanish poem, which talks about making the road by walking. So what it's really saying is that, you go out there and take action and do something, and you're making the pathway for them to follow it, right? There's another great example is on college campuses for ages. They would put a lawn, but the students would start like just crossing the lawn in different ways to get to class. no matter what they put down, right, in terms of like, this is how we want you to organize, these are the paths you want to stay on, the students kept cutting across and then creating these like ruts in the grass. And then a lot of these campuses just started paving over the ruts because they were like, this is the way that this is the way that traffic's actually flowing. So why don't we just make it work? So the students were exhibiting like they were making their path by walking it. They were creating something the world by taking action. You as a leader do the same thing, right? People will follow you once you create that path.
Yes. And reflecting on your career so far, can you identify like I had a moment where Forged was important. I had to apply this framework. What
Yeah.
would you say was the main?
Yeah. I mean, one of the best examples is when I was still doing technology and I was leading this global team that was responding to IT outages in a large organization. So there were lots of touch points. There were lots of systems, networks, all over the world. There were applications. There were, all the connectivity as you know, go into like a situation like that. And so what I taught my team is like, don't go into it right away just telling what has to happen, right? We're the problem resolvers. And so we have to think systemsly because all the other groups, usually when you get into one of those calls, everyone's protecting their boundaries, just like, the data people are protecting their boundary, right? It's like everyone's in there like not to have it their responsibility, right? I'm not going to say everybody, but a lot of times you're trying to protect because the reviews and everything start to go into like who's responsible. So no one wants to be responsible. So as the resolver, as the center of the resolution, I taught my folks, like, don't go in there and try to resolve right away. Go in there and listen. Right. Listening is a key thing to this, even in design thinking, it's a lot, coming to a creative solution to a new problem is so much about listening. That's their empathy part in design thinking. And so we can call it empathy, but really to me, it's just like allow the information to come out first, allow the data points to emerge before you go out and try to resolve it. Now, some things in that situation are scripted enough that, you can say like, oh, there's some failures which you can just see. They've maybe even happened a couple of times. So you know which flag to switch or whatever. On the ones that are new and you can't figure them out and you have a bunch of teams on there, listening is so important. So, that brings in like the empathy and the compassion part. Also, in dealing with the folks, I mean, if someone's calling you with a problem of an outage, it's, and that's where you are when you're running a team like that, is you're constantly dealing with the outages, and you're working towards 100% uptime. They're not happy. So usually if someone's calling you, they're not calling to congratulate you. They're calling to say like, I can't get into my application, right? So bringing compassion to it is a huge piece. And that's the first thing is in the Forge model is favor compassion. That's the F, favor compassion. And that's a lot about the listening, but it's also saying, you know what? I'm not going to go, my first reaction is to go like, oh my God, oh my God. So now I'm already defensive, right? If someone's calling with a problem. The compassion part is to go like, I'm strong enough to maintain this. And I'm strong enough to maintain a space for someone to express their angst and let me listen to that and let them know. And this is where also if you're in an outage response team or an emergency response team, you want to let people know, like, even if it's not resolved, when's the next time I'm getting back to you, right? Because you have to think from their perspective, if they don't hear back from you, even if you're working feverishly on it, they don't know what's going on. So now they're in a constant state of panic, right? Like, is it happening? Is it not happening? So part of the compassion part in that sense is, looking at it from thetheir perspective, listening to their issues. And that's also another data point to help resolve the problem, right? But also to say like, I'm going to be strong enough to not hide. I'm going to be strong enough to get out there and say like, I totally understand it. And not just in a BS kind of way, like really connect with them, right? Really understand their problem as much as you can and let them know that you're going to get back to them because you're there to help them through that problem. You're not there just to protect yourself, from getting banged up later on. So I would say the favor compassion is a huge piece of it in multiple ways, especially in terms of understanding someone else's point of view, like a user's point of view.
I guess your message here is don't panic, relax, take a deep breath,
Yeah, even in the decision making. I mean, and you asked me earlier, like, what's one key thing? And I think that's that being present is also not panicking. Because once you're panicking, you're off like in the panic world, right? And your
Yes.
whole, you're pumping out adrenaline, and you're not pumping out the things that, like, when you're using using your sympathetic system, which is the fight or flight system. So now you're just like, oh my God, you start closing down and fighting or running here. Right? Breathing into your belly engages the parasympathetic system. So that's why the breathing becomes very important, because that helps you like bring it down to what is really going on here right now. Yeah, so not panicking is like a key piece to it.
You mentioned in the book that strategic thinking can be messy in those cases. Let's elaborate more on what do you mean by messy and what's the best process to be able to think clearly and move forward.
Yeah, and that idea of messy comes from a brilliant consultant and researcher, Julia Sloan. And she has a book I think it's in its fourth or fifth edition now, called Learning to Think Strategically. And I know her as a colleague and also friend. But I asked her one time, because I was working with a group, and she has this thing about, and I was showing them her model. And there's a piece in there about, like, be open. I don't have exactly in front of me, right? But it's like, be open, but also know you have like a clear thing you're trying to get to, right? And so I was like, how do you resolve those two things, like being open and being, like very direct? And she said, well, it's messy, right? And so that's part of that, accepting all the different data points that are conflicting and then using those strategies to stay centered, but allow all the conflicting viewpoints to come in, because it's going to be a messy process. But it's that messy process of transformation and creativity is very messy. It has a lot of conflicting viewpoints. It's very confusing. You're trying to get somewhere, yet you might wind up somewhere else, which is actually better, right? This is what happens in the creativity process. You actually wind up, as long as you don't have a fear-driven corporation, you might actually wind up somewhere that's better than you had started out. This is part of the problem that, with like performance goals. When you say performance goals at the beginning of the year, if you're just tagging to those beginning of the year performance goals, you're not responding to what's actually going on in the market as it's happening. So, because you're worried about, hey man, I set a performance goal back in December and I'm going to go look at it next December or whenever, and now you're tagging to that thing. It's the same thing with any goal you set. If you are, you're working towards it, but the messy part is like going along the way and saying, yeah, I'm working towards it, and going like, oh my God, I just saw something else. Then I have to research that now, right? So you want to be focused, you want to be on a path, but you don't want to be so strict on it that you can't notice when, oh my God, this is actually not the right path. We really should be going down this way. One of the best examples of that is the digital camera. Kodak invented it, but the heads of the corporation said, no, we're a film company, we're a chemical company, and they just gave it away. They gave the whole thing away.
It's important to know when to pivot. Basically, that's the message. Yeah.
Yeah.
Leaders, in this case, they're dealing with so many things. So they're focusing on what's the best decision to make next, but they also have a team in place and they want to make sure that the environment for the team is under control and is not going crazy. So what do you recommend are the best practices in order to make sure we have the right environment?
Yeah. Well, I think it requires you. So if you have a large organization, you have, managers in between. I think those managers need to connect on a personal level, not that you want to get in someone's face about their personal life, but but really to be concerned about their career, about their work, be able to listen to their concerns, right? I know a lot of corporations are going more and more towards digital surveillance as the idea of, how do you make that happen? How do you make sure people are doing their work, right? But if you're in that mindset of you're tracking keystrokes and bandwidth and mouse movements and stuff, I mean, you're in the wrong business. I mean, unless you're a data entry company, there are still those around, Like, why are you tracking their keystrokes? You should be looking at the output and the creativity and, are they getting their, it depends on, what their task was, but if you're working on projects, are they getting their projects done? Are the clients happy? Are they getting creative output? And that you can tell. You have larger metrics like on time within budget, but you also have larger metrics, which is the thing getting done useful, which is all part of the agile model anyways. You shouldn't be working on anything that's not useful. But if you're looking at while they're doing their work, and I use a lot of technology examples because I have a technology background, but in any environment, this applies, which is that, if you're focused on making sure that the productivity is through the amount of work they're putting in, the amount of hours they're putting in, you're not focused on the right thing. You need to be focused on, are they learning new things and bringing new things to the table, right? That could be like, in a world where AI is coming up, is that one thing that they're learning? But also, and there's a great story in the book about a leader, an executive who came in and knew what she wanted the team to do and saw that the team was doing things that were from like 5-6 years ago, right? It was a social media effort. And she said, you know what? I want them to go out, figure it out, and come back to me with the answer. Because if they can do that, I know now that I have a group that's going to be creative and come up with new ideas. And that's what I need. I don't want to just be telling them every single move they have to make, right? You have to create a team that brings ideas to you, right? As a leader, that's what's helping your strategy move forward. And so that's what she did. She told them all, to gave them a week. They came back and they actually came back with the answer she was looking for, that's great. But the other thing that happened, it was almost right after that the pandemic hit. And they had to completely rework the corporate website because of the kind of website it was. The kind of company it was. And because she had created a learning organization that could deal with, I'm going to say, that messiness of like, here's something we don't know, but now we know we'll have the freedom to go out and figure it out. They actually created a new website. I think the viewership went from 8,000 to something like 30,000 a day, right? And they had to completely rework the website, but they had a learning organization, so they didn't have to just wait around and sit and have her think through the whole thing. It's like now you had a creative team that could move this whole thing forward very quickly. So if you want to have quick, moving, innovative teams, you can't measure them by keystrokes and mouse strokes and how many hours. You have to measure them by output and thinking capabilities and new thinking capabilities.
Yes. You can't micromanage them.
You can't micromanage them. As you know, that's one of my big pet peeves is just micromanagement. I just don't think it gets anyone where they want to go.
Yeah. So you're working with a lot of leaders right now. What do you find are some of the common issues or problems that you're helping them with? Yeah, and what are the things that maybe, let's say, they're not getting right, they're getting wrong, and they need support with?
Yeah. So in my one-on-one work, I find, which is with board members. So when I do consulting, it's almost 100% with board members. What I'm finding is the biggest problem that those folks have is knowing what they want their individual work to be and their individual outcome to be. Right. So there can be a lot of contention on a board. There can be a lot of minds that don't agree. Sometimes there can be a board chair that is very dogmatic and tries to, again, micromanages, even at that level. That's supposed to be a high level kind of group. But what I found is when I work with board members is that's one of the biggest problems that happens over and over is, what do they really want to accomplish here? Not that they don't know what their task is and what the thing is they're working on. But when they're being confronted by all these power things, do they want to take on the power structure and control? Some do, right? Some want to control the whole situation, but others really just want to make the best effort they can and do a great job at what their individual contribution is, right? And so when you understand your boundaries and what you want to get out of it, which is really the same process of strategic thinking, being in the moment, know what your values are, what your concerns are, what you want to happen. It's the same thinking. It's the same strategic thinking. When I work with them on that, there's so much because they go in there and like knowing what they want to accomplish. And so all these petty things that go on in these power struggles, a lot of it now just rolls off them because they're like, you know what? That's not my problem anymore, right? I don't want to take over the board. I just want to be a great contributor. I want to do my piece. And so they focus on that and they do an amazing job. And they're seen now and respected for all of that versus getting into the power struggle, and it's the same thing with like, how do you approach like working with your group or working with a team when you're in a power struggle? It's like, really, where do you want to be in this?
What's your final advice for leaders? They want to become better at what they're doing. What should they focus on, or what's your advice?
Yeah. Well, I think we've kind of hit it. And I love that you brought up this idea of like, don't panic. And in a certain way, I would say like, don't panic. One of the things that came up through my research on leaders in my doctoral research, and I'm actually working that to its own book. So you'll see that coming up soon, but is this idea, and this is the biggest tip I would give you, is this idea of having faith, having faith in the outcome, having faith in yourself, not listening to the stories others have of you, not listening to the story. Those don't define you. I mean, unless you allow them to, not listening to the stories that maybe are swinging around over and over again in your mind that someone else has put there, that are really they're constantly coming at you. I would say that that's sort of like a rumination versus thinking. The idea of strategic thinking and being a leader really needs you to be your whole self in the moment. So this idea, not panicking, not listening to other people's stories about you. Same thing about working with the board members, not listening to what the other folks are thinking about you, right? It's really about bringing yourself to the moment to be a great leader. Over and over again, it comes out in the book. Bring yourself to the moment. Make the effort that needs to be made, right? And the only way you're going to come to that is really by quieting all those other voices. I mean, listening to other people's concerns, but not allowing them to push them, but just allowing them to be more things that are more ideas that are flowing through so that messiness can be created and then you emerge through it.
Yeah, absolutely. What's the next book about?
The next book, I got three in mind. One is to turn and I'm working on all three of them. I'm not sure which is going to be finished first. The first one is about turning the doctoral research about executive mentoring into a book on itself, because I think in this day and age, not that I think, it's that in talking to other leaders and in talking to other managers and to talking to my students who are in the Gen Z era, there's some mismatch about work and Gen Z. And Gen Z is the future, right? They're now and the future, because the Gen Z thing is something like 20 years, 6 years long or something.
And they don't want to work.
Sorry?
And they don't want to work?
Well, that's the complaint all the time, right? They don't want to work or they don't care about aligning. And my take on it is, and that's what I want to do, is I want to bring my research and the stories, because I talked to the leaders and got their life stories about what they invested. It's kind of bring those two things together. It's like, what can we learn and how can we apply it to help this problem of bringing leaders and Gen Z together to make a great working place for all of them, where there is productivity. And I guarantee you, it's not counting keystrokes. The other book is about micromanagement. I mentioned three, but the two main ones, that one. And I just think there's this thing about workplace. I consider micromanagement as a form of bullying, right? It's a fear-driven form of bullying that, again, if you're in an acute situation where someone's dying and you have to have someone press on the wound and you just have to say, you press on that wound. Okay. So in micromanagement, that sense is okay sometimes, right? But as a model of ongoing leadership and even management, it just doesn't work. It just doesn't work, because you'll get burnout. There's lots of health risks, not health risks. There's health, problems that go along with that. So you're causing folks health problems. You're causing folks lower productivity, because now that whole worry thing is like on their minds, right? So if that's constant 100% of the time, you're not going to get productivity out of them, right? So I just think it's a big pet peeve of mine is like micromanagement right now. So that's the other book I'm working on. And what I'm really comparing is workplace bullying, micromanagement, and even I'm starting to look at microaggressions and the health problems that come along with folks who are under the stress of microaggressions. And they're very similar to the outcomes of getting bullied, right? And when you tie that whole thing together, micromanagement is just not a model to really create a great team.
Absolutely, yeah. It creates resentment at the end, and they will. I mean, if you're talking about Gen Z, they will be looking for a new job before you know it.
Right. Yeah. So you need to find a way to engage them. And to me, the way to do that is what aligns them, what in their experience and where they want to go, where they want to be, aligns with the mission and vision statement, right? Where the corporation wants to be. And unless you find that piece out, it's not just come in here, we're going to give you orientation, we're going to tell you the mission vision statement, you better align to it, right? I mean, what's really coming out, I think, right now is something that really should have been done long ago, is really finding out what their experience is, what they want to get out of it, and then helping them understand how that aligns with the mission and vision of the company, right? It may be that it doesn't, then you have a different kind of problem. Maybe you can try to turn it around, right? But usually in there somewhere is something that aligns that you can actually make use of to help bring the best out in them and then help make their efforts be the best for the company as well.
Yeah, create an environment they want to be in, basically.
Yeah, in short.
If someone wants to reach out, work with you, what's the best way?
Yeah, the best thing is you can look at my website, douglasscherer.com. It's maybe on the screen there. But if you want to connect with me, you can always DM me directly in LinkedIn. And then there's also a contact sheet at the website as well.
Thank you, Douglas. This was very helpful, especially knowing what to do or what's the best approach when things are stressful. Taking a deep breath, being grounded, relaxing.
Yeah. Take a deep breath, use that belly breath, and feel your feet on the floor. Those are my 2 top tips for that. Well, thank you so much, Jad. This has been a real pleasure.
Thanks for tuning into the Resilient in Business podcast. This show is all about providing valuable insights and inspiring entrepreneurs to keep pushing forward no matter the challenges. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to subscribe and help us spread the message. See you on the next one.